Your hosts are here, Sammie and Michelle. By the end of this podcast, you'll know them well. Adulting, navigating the journey of life. Careers to relationships, pain and strife. Put down the rule book, rethink the status quo. If there's another direction you wanna go, find purpose, passion and mastery in all that you do with Status Post Adulting.
Hey, Status Post Adulting fam! This is Sammie
and Michelle,
and you're listening to the 60th episode of Status Post Adulting, where we're going to be talking about The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. But first, let me check in with my co-host Michelle. How are you doing, Michelle?
I'm doing really well, Sammie. I just got back from San Francisco and the Bay Area. I was in town because it was our mother's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom.
Happy birthday, Cheemer.
And my friend Suhaila had a big play that she was directing, and so it was the perfect time for me to go back, which was really great. And I got to see so many people. I got to see my friends that live in the Bay Area, and a lot of people had come into town that she knows to support her, so I got to see her family and people that we both know from college. So it was a really nice reunion overall. The play was really great. It was beautifully done and beautifully executed. It was just great to be back. It was a packed schedule. I was only there for a few days, so if I missed anyone, sorry, I'll catch you next time. But it was really nice to just go back for a little bit and feel all the feelings of being back home, quote unquote.
Very true. And for Michelle and I to travel these days, it's not so simple. We have to drive 2 hours to the airport, so Michelle did have to do that to fly over there.
Yeah, that's true, Sammie. And I did run into a couple of snafus. The first was because I was driving 2 hours to get to the airport, I obviously had to park somewhere. And it's a small airport, so there's not really a lot of places to park. And so I had booked a place on Spot Hero. And this is no shade to them, but I had booked a spot on Spot Hero, and I luckily called a couple of days before I had to go because they had said, like, if you want a shuttle, you can call them to organize it. And when I called them, this woman picked up, and I was like, hey, like, said to call this number because Nick would arrange a shuttle. And she was like, yeah, like, we don't do parking anymore. And I was like, what? And she was like, yeah, we don't do parking anymore. And I was just like, oh, well, because I booked a spot and I don't know if this is the wrong number to call. And she's like, I'll give you another kind of number to call. And I was like, well, who is this? And she's like, it's a place where you can park. And I was just like, okay. And this was like the day before I left. So I was like, oh my God. And so I called this other number and this guy picks up and I was like, hey, like, I had booked a place on Spy Hero and then they told me it doesn't exist. And now I'm calling you. And I don't really know, but I need a place to park tomorrow. And luckily, he was, like, so helpful. Like, he was like, yeah, we don't have a booking site on Spot Hero, but, like, I definitely want to honor it, and we'll try to make space for it if you can. So try to book online at this other website. And I was a little nervous because I didn't know much about it, but it ended up working really well. He was really sweet. They shuttled me back and forth. It was perfectly fine.
That sounds very stressful, and I'm literally stressed out just even hearing it.
What's worse is on the way back, I went to go get gas at Costco, and I had been listening to Spotify on the plane, like all these playlists that I put together, because I knew I'd be traveling and I wanted to have my offline playlist. And then they kicked me off online literally right before I was about to do my 2-hour drive. And so I'm at Costco, and there are so many cars because of everything going on in the world and with the gas prices going up. So there was just like a bajillion cars there. And luckily I was like, okay, I have some time. I can like re-log in. And I'm like trying to figure it out. I don't have like my password saved on 1Password because I think I had set it up a long time ago on my phone. I just could not get through to Spotify. What I would realize 2 days later is that Spotify actually went offline. But I was so mad. But luckily I had my books to listen to, so it was fine. But I was not happy with Spotify in that moment. And for my 2-hour drive back, I was just angry at Spotify. But I survived.
So true. And speaking of gas, Michelle and I like to pump gas in Arizona, which is just one town over. And we're very excited about daylight savings time.
Yes! It's daylight savings time, and I never thought I would be excited for springtime daylight savings time, Sammie.
Me neither. Because, you know, I love my mornings, and the morning's going to be darker. but I am very happy to be in the same time zone as Arizona because literally it is very confusing to not be in their time zone.
It seems like a small thing. Like, it's hard to talk about it without it sounding as inconvenient as it is. But when you cross over into another state that doesn't change their time zones with everybody else in the country, you know, we end up an hour ahead, and sometimes our clocks sync, sometimes they don't. Obviously, our car things don't change, and you're in places, and sometimes you're like, is this about to close? I don't know. It's just like a minor inconvenience that ends up being a major inconvenience. And so I'm very excited about daylight savings time.
Yeah, it will definitely simplify things for us.
Agreed, Sammie. And speaking of agreements, today we're going to be talking about the 4 Agreements, A Practical Guide to Personal Freedom by Don Miguel Ruiz.
That is exactly right, Michelle.
We are so excited to talk about the 4 Agreements because 2 people, my friend Abby and my friend Arjun, recommended this book separately to us. And so that alone, I was telling Sammie, I was like, we have to talk about this book. 2 people have mentioned it. And then we just started to see it everywhere.
Mm-hmm. That is so true. Michelle told me about these 2 people who had mentioned the book. And then I was watching this YouTube video about being in tune with your spirit guides. And people in the comments were talking about Don Miguel Ruiz. And when I looked him up, I realized he's the one who wrote the book. And I'm like, oh my God, there are so many signs that we need to read this book. So here we are. And you know what? The great thing is it's a very short book. Short, but filled with tons of knowledge. The best kind of book out there.
Yeah, it's only like 2 hours. So honestly, maybe just stop listening to this and go listen to the book instead. But in case you want a little bit of a sample, we will definitely talk about all of the agreements and what this book is really about.
So, Michelle, I feel like we should maybe start out with what Don Miguel Ruiz means by agreements. How I interpreted his meaning of agreements is these agreements or rules that we have within our own system of functioning that regulate how we behave in the world.
That was my understanding of it too, Sammie. He's basically talking about how when you're born, when you're raised in whatever society that you're raised in, we are basically taught to be a certain way. And we're basically making these agreements, quote unquote, with ourselves and with society to be a certain way. And his argument is that a lot of those agreements are maybe there to make sure that we're acting a certain way, or they're things that we hear, like maybe bad habits that we're picking up, and they're not actually good for us. And so he has come up with these 4 agreements based off, supposedly, the Toltec culture, which is a pre-Columbian Mesoamerican culture that ruled a state centered in Tula, Hidalgo, Mexico during 950 to 1150 CE, according to Wikipedia. He also sprinkles in things from other religions as well, but that does seem to be what this is rooted in, according to the book.
Yes, exactly, Michelle. And those agreements that he talks about, the ones that we are taught to go by our parents, by society, by everybody around us, these little rules that everybody tells us to follow. It's interesting because a lot of rules conflict with each other. You know, they'll be like, oh, you must be nice and polite to everybody. But at the same time, oh, hey, we're going to gossip about these people. And all of these little things that we're kind of taught either directly or indirectly, they guide how we behave, they guide how we think, they guide how we speak, and they can really create like a poison inside of us because we're following rules that are not authentic to us and also potentially causing harm to others.
Yeah, Sammie, it's interesting because when you hear the 4 agreements, they're very simple, but hearing him talk through them and talk about why they're important really resonated with me because it is the little things and the little ways that we approach life and talk to others and talk about others that actually affect so much of what we do. Getting into it, the 4 agreements. The first agreement is be impeccable with your word. The second agreement is don't take anything personally. The third agreement is don't make assumptions. And the fourth agreement is always do your best.
That's exactly right, Michelle. And to start off with, impeccable speech, or being impeccable with your word. This was a perfect agreement for me because, as I mentioned in a previous episode, my Lenten goal is to have impeccable speech. I think what I said is not to gossip or not to have any bad speech, but really it is to have impeccable speech. Don Miguel Ruiz points out how impeccable itself means without sin. And when he describes sin, he means sin as anything that you do that goes against yourself. So really, the goal is for our speech to be pure, our speech to be creating good in the world rather than creating evil. And he talks a lot about magic, not necessarily in any mystical way, but he talks about how our words can create either pure magic in the world, which creates more good and more beautiful things, or our words can be black magic, which kind of put a spell or a poison on other people, as well as it creates a spell or poison within ourselves.
Yeah, Sammie, I really felt this piece. This is an agreement that he says is the most important, and it definitely takes the biggest chunk of the book as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because the things that you say to others and the things that you tell yourself is putting out either good or bad vibes into the world. For me, this really resonated because I am the type of person that loves to gossip with my friends, and I'll find myself looking at things online that are salacious, and you do feel that you're putting this negative energy out into this world because you're poisoning your brain with all of these thoughts that are like negative. And he also talks about how a lot of times this is rooted in our own self-worth as well. Like the things that we're judging people on is also the things that we judge ourselves on. So we end up being so nasty to the world because we're actually being nasty to ourselves.
Yeah, Michelle. And I would say with my new Lenten goal of trying to not gossip and not have any bad speech, I've really seen how it can really change your mentality. Like if you don't gossip or you try not to have any like bad or harmful speech, over time, like over these last few weeks, I'm starting to notice that I just like make less judgments because that's not something I'm planning on talking about in the future. So it's kind of irrelevant. And I think a point to that is, when we judge other people, it's like we're trying to say how they're in error against a perfect standard, which we also don't meet. Don Miguel Ruiz talks about how we are all in our own mitote, which is kind of like our own world, which is filled with our own biases, which can be really negative or messed up, or, some of them are fine, but it's like this whole web. Since hearing about him talk about mitote in the book, I do see mitotes in real life. Like you'll see two people talking to each other, but they're kind of having their own conversation with themselves, trying to justify their own points to themselves based on their own reality that they are each living in. And he talks about how this is similar to Maya in Hinduism and Buddhism. We're all living in our own kind of like suffering in our own world, and then we go out into a world and we project that onto other people. And instead of having a brain that's like, why is this person doing this? Why is this person doing this? Let me talk about this person with this person. When we understand that everybody's in their own mitote, it's like, they're all doing their own thing, and that has nothing to do with me. And I don't need to spread more poison into the world by telling other people how I feel about other people's mitotes.
Absolutely, Sammie. And I have to say, too, when I think about this first agreement, to me, this is so much the core of karma as well. Like when people talk about karma and what goes around comes around, you can think of it in this very mystical way where the universe is taking judgment and doing whatever. But I think one way that it really makes sense to me is exactly like this agreement where it's like, if you put negative energy out there, if you're saying negative things, then that's going to come back to you. If you're creating a space where people are not good, if you're saying bad things about people, even little comments, like they end up recirculating and coming back to you. Whether it's something that you are negatively believing and then reinforcing by saying it out loud, or by just creating an environment where you're attracting people who aren't good. And I believe that so much. Like I always think whenever I'm positive, optimistic, and saying good things come back to me. Versus like when I find myself in an ugly place, it's very easy to get stuck there because you end up talking about other people and then you just end up speaking so negatively and you just reinforce this negative space. I think it's why it's so important, like who you surround yourself with. And a lot of that is, who are you? And do people who are good people want to spend time with you?
You said that really well. It reminds me just of the fact that in each moment, we have an opportunity to plant a seed Are we going to plant a good seed or a bad seed? And at the end of the day, when we look at our garden, it will reflect what we've been planting.
Yes, exactly, Sammie. Don Miguel Ruiz talks about this as well, and I think it's such a good point, which is, like you said, is like putting seeds out there. If you're planting bad seeds, you're going to have bad flowers. If you're putting positive seeds, you're going to have good flowers. And I think that just makes sense to me.
If you listen to the audiobook version of the 4 agreements, that's going to make a lot of sense to you. But I'm moving on to the next agreement, which is don't take anything personally.
Don't take it personally. Don Miguel Ruiz, 1997.
This one is great. I love this agreement. He gives this example where like a stranger comes up to you and says, "You're so stupid." Do you think this has nothing to do with me? Like clearly this has something to do with that person's mitote? Or do you think, how does he know? Is this a clairvoyant person who has just appeared to me and knows that I am stupid? That's really what taking things personally is about. As we talked about before, everybody's in their own mitote. They're all projecting that onto the world. And it's not our job to take things personally. We can objectively look at ourselves and find ways to improve ourselves, but we do not need to take anything personally. And I really like what he says, because he says, don't take anything personally. That is, don't take things of personal importance. And he says this is the maximum expression of selfishness. And I love that because a lot of times we think of selfishness as someone who's trying to act for themselves, but in a positive way. But really, and this is true in Buddhism as well, when we are so fixated on whether we have bad characteristics or whether people think something bad about us, we are really being selfish. Like we are so focused on ourselves and our own world and forgetting that other people are completely also in their own world. We are not that important such that all these people have thoughts about us so seriously.
It's so true, Sammie. And it's exactly like you say, where it's really, once again, tied to your own self-worth, which is if someone says something to you and you don't believe that about yourself, you won't take it personally. But if you do secretly feel like, in this example, you feel like you're stupid or ugly or whatever it is, someone says that to you and you're like, oh my gosh, they can see me. They know my flaws. And really, this agreement ties back to the first one, which is taking ownership of your word and making sure you're not putting bad words out there. And this is really the receiving side of that, which is like, hey, people have words and not everybody's putting out good words, but that doesn't mean that you need to take what they're saying personally.
Exactly. And when we don't take it personally, we avoid all the black magic, all the poison that others are putting on us. They don't mean to do it. They're in their own mitote. But they are putting things out there. And if we are not in a good space, we can take things personally, and then we can accept the poison that other people bring to us. But if we are in a good space, we know, hey, that's their own thing. I'm not going to take it personally. I'm not going to accept that into my reality. I like what he says, because he says, if you don't take things personally, you can go travel the world with your heart completely open, because no one can hurt you.
It's so true, Sammie. I think it's so much about just being open and having love for people in the world and being able to accept and receive the love back.
Yeah, exactly, Michelle. And I do hear like a lot of people say like, oh, this person did XYZ to me in the past, so I can't open my heart anymore. No, that's just wrong. Nobody did anything to you. You allowed their mitote into your world. You can always open your heart. Your heart can always be open, and you do not need to be scared about your heart being open, because you don't have to accept any poison that comes your way. That's your choice, whether you want to accept the poison or not. If you don't want to accept it, you can open your heart to the world. You can love everybody endlessly and without reservation and not be scared, because you're never going to get hurt.
It's so true, Sammie. And as someone who is a Capricorn and a Cancer moon, I am a huge grudge holder, and so this is an agreement that feels very directed towards me in a lot of ways. And it makes a good point. And once again, I think it comes back to loving yourself, which then allows you to open yourself to love in the world and loving others.
Agreement number 3, don't make assumptions. So Don Miguel Ruiz talks about how we as humans, the way we've been trained to rationalize things, we want to explain and understand everything. And if we don't get an explanation or an understanding, we make assumptions so that we can make this whole world fit.
It's so crazy, Sammie, because I feel like I'm so guilty of this without even fully realizing where it's come from. Because I've done this a lot and people have like called me out on it. I tend to, like when I hear something that I don't fully understand, even if I like flag it a little bit in my brain, I like quickly justify it with my own assumptions, or I just make sense of it. And then sometimes it unravels and I'm like, oh yeah, I just thought this, but I guess that doesn't make sense and that was based off nothing. I do it all the time. Like I just, recently one of my friends was telling me a story about one of her friends and I thought it was about someone else that I knew. And everything she said didn't make sense. Like it didn't line up with this person's character. It didn't line up with their social life. And I was like, and finally I was like, man, like, you know, and what happened to like, you know, this person in her life? And my friends just looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I was like, you know, and even then I didn't even ask any questions. And then finally they were like, wait, we're not talking about that person. It was a legit 5 minutes. We had multiple conversations over text and stuff about this person. I was completely imagined the wrong person the whole entire time. Even though like in the back of my mind, I knew things weren't adding up.
It's so true, Michelle. I do it too. And really, we all do it. Like, I always think about how, you know, when people have like visual defects and stuff, a lot of times they don't see like a black hole in space. Like their brain fills it in with what it's supposed to be. That's our reality. When we don't know things, when we don't understand things, we just fill in the rest of that circle and we try to make it happen. It's hard for us to live with all these voids. But the problem is we end up making judgments and then we get upset when those judgments prove to be not true or when someone else has a different opinion of things.
It's true, Sammie. And a lot of it is rooted in the fact that we don't have the courage to ask questions and the fact that we also just assume that everyone has, he says, like sees life the way we do, judge the way we judge, and abuse the way we abuse. Like we assume everybody is having the same life experiences that we are. And then we end up being so narrow about our perspective, even unintentionally.
And I really like his example, Michelle, where he talks about the person who is going to the mall and somebody smiles at them. Then they start like fantasizing about this future with that person. And they even start envisioning their wedding and they start envisioning their little happy life together.
Feel a little bit attacked there, okay, Don?
I was like, other people do that?
DMR, okay? Feel a little attacked.
But it's so true. We create these like fantasies, whether good or bad, about what's going on. You know, we assume people are talking about us. We assume we fantasize about beautiful potential realities, and none of that's real. That's once again our own mitote, and we're just going on with it, and we're just creating these like artificial realities that have nothing to do with real life.
It's funny, Sammie. I feel like this agreement was a little bit of like the relationship chapter because one, he's like, stop fantasizing about every person that smiles at you and going into this world that doesn't exist. And he also talks about how when we have people in our lives, like our loved ones, a lot of times we think that they should know what we want, we should know what we need, and then we get mad when they don't know how we feel because we're assuming that they have an understanding of our needs because they're the same as us, when in reality they aren't, and then we end up picking fights for it.
Yeah, exactly, Michelle. It's like we get upset at people for not acting in the way that we think that they should act towards us because we're like, they should know not to do that to me because if they love me, they would know. And it's like, no. Once again, they are in their own mitote, doing their own mitote dance, and they have no idea what's going on with you.
It's true. And he does also make the point that we have a lot of assumptions about ourselves. It might be things that we heard when we were little, like you're smart, you're stupid. It can be good or bad. But we have these assumptions about ourselves that we don't challenge. And then we end up creating a lot of inner conflict because that's where our self-worth is. That's where our insecurities are. Or even like things that we think we're above average in because we just never challenge that notion. And I think that's so important too. Like recognize that it's not just about assumptions of other people. It's also the assumptions that you have about yourself. And it's the good and bad assumptions. Like, if everybody's like, you're so great and smart and you're the best person in the world, that is also based off of their own internal things, the good and the bad. Like, you basically saying, like, you shouldn't let anyone's assumptions, yours or others, define who you are as a person. We're all just living and being present in this world.
It's so true, Michelle. Like he says, if someone says you're great, don't take it. Like, you know you're great. Like, you already know that about yourself. So you don't need to, be taking all these things from other people, because then you're relying on other people's words to help create your reality when their words are already messed up because they're coming from their own messed up reality. So don't even. Just let all that go. Let it go.
And I'll have to break up with all my fantasy boyfriends, unfortunately. Moving on, Sammie. The fourth agreement is always do your best. Under any circumstance, always do your best. No more, no less.
And I'm not going to lie, Michelle. At first, when I heard this one, kind of stressed me out for some reason.
Oh, same. Oh,
yeah,
no,
right?
Same. I was like, do my best? Always do my best. I immediately felt anxious.
I was like, I don't know about all that. That sounds like a lot. Like, all the time doing my best, that seems like a lot. He does bring out that our best varies on how we are doing as a person. My best at 12 o'clock at night is not going to be the same as my best at 7 o'clock in the morning. It most certainly will not. So it's not like we're comparing ourselves to the same standard every time. It's just that we're always putting out that best effort, that best energy.
Yeah, Sammie, it's a lot more forgiving. It's really about understanding that in any given moment, you might be in a different mood, you might be hungry, you might be happy, whatever it is, whatever you are in that moment, do your best, and also have compassion that your best does change. It's meant to be both compassionate to yourself, so they're always doing your best, and also forgiving. Like, the point is not to be judgmental. The point is to do your best in that moment and then move on. No need to linger, feel guilt, or judge because you know you did your best, whatever that meant for you in that moment.
Yeah, Michelle. And in the phrase do your best, the most important word is do. He talks about how if you're doing your best, you're always taking action. And if we're taking action as humans, we are happy. We wake up every morning, we feel a different mood. But if we're like, you know what, I need to go brush my teeth and start my day, that action of going and doing, that's what brings us happiness. Like that, we feel like a contentment with that because we know that we are moving forward no matter what state we're in.
I did think it was really interesting, Sammie, that he wove in do your best with the doing portion, like you said, because it's so true. He's going right back to the action changes things.
Yes.
Where it's like, it's the doing that actually facilitates the like doing your best. It's not just thinking, it's not being in your head, it's not overanalyzing, it's just taking action and then being able to say, I did this, I did my best, and feeling enjoyment in the fact that you took action and doing things that make you happy.
And now that I think about it, Michelle, when we're doing, we are out of the mitote most of the time.
That is true.
Doing is very actionable versus thinking or planning or waiting for inspiration. Those things are just kind of us sitting around letting our mind go off, aka letting the mitote go ham. Versus once we take physical actions, we are usually letting go of the mitote to some degree to focus on doing whatever physical thing we need to do.
That is so true, Sammie. It's really all about the fact that when you're doing something, you're actually encountering problems that you're going to run into. You're actually in the world experiencing it. When you do something, it's a linear thing. You do it, there's a response, you respond to it, there's one way about it. But when you're thinking about something, you're thinking, okay, maybe this happens, maybe that happens. There's like 100 different ways and 100 different voices and 100 different scenarios you can think of. And you're exactly right. It's about getting out of your head and just doing. And that's actually where a lot of like the happiness comes from, I think, in taking action.
So true, Michelle. Another thing he brought up was how doing our best varies at different times. And one that was notable to me was doing your best will be different when you're not sober or you're hungover or you're drunk or whatever versus when you're sober. And I really thought about this in our episode on the life-changing magic of sobriety, because I think if you always act with the intention to do your best, eventually you do start leaning towards like, hey, like, I don't really want to incorporate any altering substances into my day or into my life because it's harder for me to do my best. Even things like sugar, like, we get a sugar high and then a sugar low. It's really hard to do your best when you're on like a glycemic roller coaster. And I think when you focus on doing your best, you recognize what are these barriers that constantly keep getting in the way of you doing your best. And that kind of helps you change things a little bit for the future so that you can be in a better state. You'll exercise, you'll be well rested, you'll avoid substances. You're not going to overeat. You're not going to eat too much sugar because you're trying to do your best. You're trying to be in the best state that you can be when you're taking actions.
That's a really good point, Sammie. I think it's so true. I think that I've seen this for myself in different things that I try to do, but when I am trying to put my best self forward, I do want to eliminate the things that are impairing my judgment, being hungry, being tired, being drunk, all of those things. Like, if you keep making excuses for yourself because of how you are, because you've done something to yourself that has depleted you, like, it happens for sure. But I think there's a certain point where you need to be like, yeah, like if I'm not my best self when I'm in this type of zone, maybe that's not something I should be trying to do. Or maybe I should be really trying to take care of myself, which I think that's like the biggest thing. It's like if you're healthy and you're well rested and you're well fed and you're taking care of yourself, you're loving yourself, you're showing yourself that you care about yourself, you're actually better able to also be a better human in the world and also take care and show love to other people in the world as well.
You said it well, Michelle. So those are the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your speech. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions. And always do your best. And if you act and if you move with these 4 agreements inside of you, you will be living a very pure, happy, and beautiful life. As he says, if you accept these beautiful rules, you will be making love to everything around you every second. You will be in a state of bliss. And I know that sounds dramatic, but you know what it reminded me of, Michelle? Our experience in Tulum.
Tezzmacal!
I
wrote that down
Oh my
too.
God, I wrote that down. That's so funny. Yes, I was thinking of Tezzmacal. So Michelle and I did this thing. I'm not sure if we've talked about it on the podcast before, but we went down to Mexico and we were planning on having a lovely massage. But there were no massage slots available, and they were like, well, if you want, it's Tezzmacal Tuesday.
It's Tezzmacal Tuesday. And we were like, sure. We don't know what it is, but we were pretty down to do whatever. We literally went in with absolutely no idea what we signed up for.
Yeah, we were like, okay, cool. Like, what's Tezzmacal? They're like, oh, it's like a transformative spiritual experience. And I'm like, so like, what happens exactly in Tezzmacal? They're like, oh, like, it's very transformative. Like, just wait here. The shaman will be here. So Michelle and I, like, we're waiting there. We're a little bit like I would say mildly concerned, but like curious about what's going to happen. And then the shaman comes. It was actually a Shaw woman, which was like a wonderful, pleasant surprise. I didn't even know they were Shaw women.
Yeah, which is our own limited mindset.
Yeah.
Don't make assumptions, Sammie.
Don't make assumptions.
But she was lovely.
She was lovely.
Best shaman I've ever experienced.
Best shaman ever. Best shaman ever. And we get led over to this little dome, this little clay dome.
Tiny. It could fit. There were like 10 of us, and we all sat around the perimeter, and that was it. That was like the space that we had.
So we enter this dome, and she leads us through this like multiple hours long session of pretty much you're like letting go of everything and bringing in all your positive wishes. And it's in this like dark, hot dome where they're constantly bringing in these. Yeah, it's just completely black. And they're constantly bringing in these clay lava rocks that are very hot. So it's getting very warm. Like one person had to leave because it was too hot for them.
Yeah, this big dude got overwhelmed and he had to like exit. And that made me feel better in that moment because I was like, okay, he's not handling this. But I think I'm doing okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the shaman kind of let us know that like that's partially because he's not ready for the freedom. But yeah, so we let go of all these negative thoughts inside of us. We brought in positive things. We did little songs and prayers together. And ultimately, like, she had us kind of like go through a death.
We died.
Yeah. And so, like, we're all like laying on
and
the
we're
floor.
not on drugs. We're pretty sure we're not on drugs.
We're pretty sure we're not on drugs. And I don't know if it's the heat, but like, let me tell you, we all died and we all just like laid there sweaty, gross, probably, no offense. And
one with each other, though.
One with each other. We were like, I think we all felt very connected, even though we couldn't see each other. And then we were reborn. And reborn as a new person who kind of let go of all that negativity and brought in all the positivity. And we come out of the Tesmacal little dome thing. And first of all, it is a different time of day because it was nighttime when we came out of it. We were in that sweaty little dome for a long time. And we came out and like we were so present. And they gave us these fruits, and this was the most delicious fruit we've ever eaten. Like, we were all just so transformed. And I kid you not, like, for 2 weeks after that, I was in a completely different mental place.
Yeah, if you ever go to Mexico, maybe specifically Tulum, I don't know, but highly recommend Tesmacal.
Tesmacal Tuesday.
Tesmacal.
Forget Taco Tuesday.
And they, like, I remember the stars were, like, beautiful. And we're, like, in the ocean, like, crying. It was, like,
we were crying.
In, like, a very positive way. It was, like, such an open experience. And this relates back to the book. Because he actually talks about, like, dying and reborning and being born again. And, like, he ties it a little bit to, like, the resurrection, I think. And it just really, I like really understood what he was saying because like what he's saying is like, take this person who is flawed, who has learned all these negative agreements and like let that person leave and give birth to this person who, yes, they will be flawed, but will try to do their best to incorporate these more positive agreements in their life. And I felt the same way as I did after Tesmacal, was just like very present and very positive about the world. Very like fearless and just wanted to be very authentic to myself. Like there's like a freedom that came from it. We don't really talk about it in this podcast, but the last couple chapters, he's like done talking about the 4 agreements and he's taking it to another spiritual place. And I think that really takes the book like up a notch where you're just really like, I think everything just like really hit home for me in that moment.
Yeah, exactly, Michelle. The book, the agreements sound simple. They sound simple to understand, but like you really have to read the book. It's a transformative experience. And it is like a little mini Tesmacal. I think it's funny that we both wrote down Tesmacal. We wrote down notes separately and we're coming to this conversation. So I didn't know that she wrote down Tesmacal. I also wrote down Tesmacal. And yeah, but it really was like just acknowledging the mitotes that we all live in, get rid of it, bring in positive agreements, and you will be making love to everything at every second and be in a perpetual state of bliss.
Yeah, Sammie. And I love what he talks about. Like a theme he really talks about is how we create heaven and hell on earth. And part of the 4 agreements is about taking control of what's going around us and enjoying life and creating heaven on earth instead of creating hell, which he said like hell is defined as this person where people are mean and they're saying bad things and you don't trust anybody. And as a society, we create that. We have all of these rules that make us enemies with each other. And there's so much poison out there and information out there that's just like so toxic. But if we really focus on these 4 agreements, and that's a step to create heaven on earth and to really enjoy your time on this earth.
Yes. He even says, with these 4 agreements, you can live in heaven even when everybody around you is in hell. Because you're not accepting the poisons around you. You are just living the pureness that is inside you.
I love it, Sammie. I myself wonder how all this relates to the Toltec culture, but that's... We didn't do a history study on this.
Maybe Tesmacal is Toltec too. We don't know.
Well, it would make sense because it's based around Mexico. This culture is based around Mexico City, and this is like hundreds of years ago at this point. So I'm sure the cultures overlap and there's like similar themes. Who knows?
Who knows?
Or maybe this is just what they saw tourists. Who knows? But it was actually such a positive experience. But thanks so much, guys, for listening. Thank you so much, Abby and Arjun, again, for giving us the suggestion of the 4 agreements. It really felt like it came at the perfect time. And so we appreciate you guys giving us those recommendations. And anybody, if there are topics, a lot of topics we're going to be talking about now have actually come up from people who listen to the podcast, which we love because we love talking about things that interest you. And it's, you're listening to this podcast. So clearly there's some common ground here. So we do love your recommendations. Keep them coming. Tell a friend about Status Post Adulting and join us next week because we love you guys and we love chatting with you every single week.
That's so right, Michelle. And most importantly, join us next time as we put down the rulebook and rethink the status quo.